Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Ginny and Georgia season 2. Let's talk about it. So Ginny and Georgia is back after 2 years since the first season dropped on Netflix. Although, even though it's been 2 years for us in the real world, it's only been a few weeks for the characters in the show, because season 2 picks up right where we left off in season 1, after Ginny had decided to pack up her things and take her brother Austin away from their mother Georgia. After she learned about all of Georgia's antics and criminal activity, Ginny had had enough finally, and she decided that it was no longer safe for her and her brother to stay with their mother. So she ran away off to her biological father's house in Boston, and that's where we pick things up in season 2, where we see them living with Ginny's father, and Ginny really going through it, you know, emotionally and mentally as a result of the events that took place in season 1. Now, when Ginny and Georgia season 1 first came out, it turned out to be quite a surprise hit, and it garnered a lot of discussion, some good, some bad. Like, people had very mixed reactions to this series. I remember being quite positive towards the series personally, although I did take issue with the way some things were handled, and this may or may not have been rectified for the second season. We'll discuss. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of people making fun of the writers for how they approach certain topics, whilst others also appreciated, you know, the presence of those topics being raised to begin with. So it was definitely a mixed bag, but I think it was overall mixed to positive, and it certainly got people talking, which is what you want for a streaming series, especially these days when you have such a crowded landscape. But today we are going to be going through my thoughts on the second season, whether I think they improved in the writing and improved in the way that they handled certain topics, especially social commentary, and whether I think season 2 ended up being even better than season 1 or not. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So first off, we're going to start off with a bang here. We're not wasting any time. We are going to tackle the biggest issue of the series, and that is the character of Ginny. Ooh. After season 1, Ginny ended up being dragged for filth by audiences because of the way that she was handled throughout the show. And it didn't have anything to do with the actress's portrayal of the character, but rather the way that she was written, and especially the way that she compared to her mother Georgia. It seemed like a real life trial was happening amongst audience members who tended to side with Georgia in this discussion, because we got to see how Georgia made so many sacrifices and really tried her best to protect her children and give them a better life than she had personally. And so it was hard to root for Ginny when she was like constantly antagonizing Georgia, blaming Georgia. And even though, you know, in our minds we know that Ginny is right, we know that what Georgia has done is wrong. We know that Georgia is wrong, we know that she's a criminal, we know that she's been doing some messed up stuff, okay, to her kids and to other people, all in the name of protecting her children. But because she does have that heart, because she does have that love for her kids that's so unconditional to the point she would do anything for them. And to be fair, it's also because she's such a charismatic, likable character. I mean, at the end of the day, you draw more flies in with honey than vinegar, right? So that's why I think so many people were attached to the character of Georgia, and that made them enemies towards Ginny, and it did not serve the character in the slightest by the end of season 1. To the point where in season 2, in one of the early episodes, we actually see Ginny comment on that, where she's in the cafe and she's talking to her colleague whose name escapes me at the moment, and she's basically saying like, oh, everyone thinks that I'm a villain, everyone hates me, everyone loves to hate me. And honestly, at that point I felt really bad for the character. I felt really bad about the way that people had treated her. Even though I myself had sided more towards Georgia, I had very much acknowledged that Ginny, you know, wasn't incorrect correct in her assessments of that character. Georgia definitely had issues. She wasn't a perfect mother, and so Ginny's, you know, queries and qualms towards her mother weren't unfounded. She was right to question what her mother had done, all in the name of protecting them. But unfortunately, people didn't really lend her the nuance and the grace that she deserved, and so it ended up being quite the challenge to have this character come back for season 2 and kind of rectify the issues from season 1 in the way that she was written there. Now, do I think that the writers did a good enough job fixing the problems that the character of Ginny had in season 1 for season 2? Yes and no. Yes and no, leaning more towards no, unfortunately. I think they really struggled with this character ultimately. The biggest issue stemmed from the way that she was written for the first few episodes of season 2. That was just so difficult to get through, guys. Here's the thing, I think the series would have benefited from having a time jump for sure. I think it was a mistake to pick season 2 up right where we left off in season 1 with only like a few weeks as a gap. I think we needed maybe a full year even to kind of process everything that happened in season 1, but also move the plot forward so that something else is happening in Ginny's life that we can focus on. The fact that she was still lamenting about the events that took place in season 1 at the beginning of season 2, and she was still in this very depressed, very kind of mentally ill position at the beginning of season 2. I don't think that was the best position for the character to start off with, so they definitely should have had a time jump there to make it feel like the character had moved on slightly with her story and her character arc. Not having that time jump and reintroducing the character at a very similar position that she was at the end of season 1 2 years ago had dire consequences for the character of Ginny in the first half of this season, in particular because it landed her right into an unfortunate stereotype of the tragic mulatto character. Now, the tragic mulatto stereotype is one that emerged in the 1830s in American literature, and this is when we start to see, you know, authors start to depict a mixed race, biracial character who falls into a lot of depression, falls into a lot of hardships and struggles in their life because of the fact that they are mixed race. In this type of literature, you constantly see the, you know, inner conflict within these mixed race people because of the fact that they have, for instance, one white parent and one black parent. And this trope was particularly pervasive as it pertains to, oh, that's a lot of peas. As it pertained to light-skinned women, you know, light-skinned biracial women who were passing. So these women, you know, appeared to be white on first glance, but were actually biracial. Perhaps they had one black ancestor that was holding them down. And it's this connection towards blackness that is depicted as being something that holds them back in society, holds them back from achieving, you know, all of the privileges and the successes of being a fully white person. For instance, there were stories where these biracial women who were passing were able to marry, you know, white men and achieve a higher status in society than any black woman ever would, but then they're found out, you know, the big secret is revealed where their family ancestry is exposed, and all of a sudden it brings them this huge downfall that leads to depression, it leads to tragedy and sometimes even suicide. And that encapsulates the tragic mulatto stereotype of the early 19th to 20th century. But as the decades have gone on, this stereotype has evolved and changed, as has, you know, society in general, but that doesn't mean that it ever disappeared. It just took on different forms. And in the case of Ginny and Georgia, we have a different form of the tragic mulatto stereotype in Ginny, where she is depicted as just being, you know, so depressed, and to the point where she is self-harming. She is truly distressed and is in mental anguish at the beginning of season 2. Now, this is not to say that a biracial character cannot be depicted as having mental health issues. That is not the case in the slightest. I think it is important to have these conversations regardless of the color of the skin of the character at the center of the story. The problem problem is, in light of the fact that you do have these harmful stereotypes existing, unfortunately, in the world, the writers need to be very careful and very intentional with the way that they depict a character of color like Ginny. And I remember even praising the first season for daring to even tackle the topic of, you know, biracialness, especially in a world where some people deny that biracial people even exist. Whatever. Anyways, that's a whole different conversation. But biracial people are here, they exist, and there's an increasing number of them even. And I think it's important to have the biracial experience be depicted in media and be defined in its own right, you know, separate from the black experience, so to speak. And I think that this show had the opportunity to do so through a character like Ginny, and it would have been great if they'd done a good job. They absolutely fumbled the bag with this one. You could tell they had no idea what to do with the character of Ginny, and therein lies the problem of having this tragic mulatto character who serves no purpose in this modern landscape in media. For instance, speaking of the fact that Ginny's biracial and she could represent the biracial experience, so to speak, you only have pretty much one line addressing this in season 2, and that is when she's in therapy and her mum comes along okay, for a joint therapy session, and Ginny brings up the fact that her mum once, you know, dressed up as Scarlett O'Hara for Halloween, and that's something that bothered her. That's pretty much the only time the show bothers to even mention how, you know, Ginny being a biracial person would have that inner conflict when it comes to her racial identity, and how her mother Georgia didn't really do much to explore this, or didn't really understand how this could happen within her daughter. That's the only time that it's mentioned, and so you can't really use the character as a positive example of exploring the biracial experience anymore, not when it's done in such a shallow way. The only other race-related topic that is explored in season 2 surrounds the AP English teacher that we were introduced to in season 1, who constantly singled out Ginny for pointing out, you know, social issues and the fact that their curriculum was so white, so Caucasian, okay, so monochromatic, if you will. And well, he's back now in season 2, and he comes up to Ginny dead ask, asking her to make a book recommendation for the class to read that best encapsulates the black experience in America. And Ginny has a very interesting conversation with her father about this, who is of two minds. You know, he says on the one hand it could be beneficial to introduce that kind of literature into the curriculum for the whole class to be exposed to. On the other hand, it's not really Ginny's responsibility to do that. You know, if her English teacher was serious, he would have done the research himself. He would have done the work that he's paid to do, okay, in order to introduce that, you know, diversity and different perspective into their curriculum. So yeah, he was of two minds, and it was definitely a challenging kind of decision for Ginny to make. It made for an interesting proposal, I must say, but that has more to do with the fact that Ginny is half black rather than the fact that she's biracial. So it doesn't really tackle the tragic mulatto stereotype that hangs over her head. Now, in the end, Ginny does recommend a book for the whole class to read, but unfortunately the English teacher, you know, he takes it even further and decides that she has to lead the teaching of this book. Like, she has to actually go through it with the class, like she's the assistant teacher, even though he's the one that's paid to do. Imagine, where's the principal? I don't think we even see the principal throughout this series. Where's the head of department? Like, who is in charge here? But I do like the storyline, I must say, even though it doesn't strictly tackle the biracial experience, but I do think it's an effective way of showing, you know, casual racism, the kind of racism that isn't really overt, but you have to kind of squint a little bit to see it. And certainly her classmates had to squint quite a lot to see anything wrong, because they just sat there and did absolutely nothing for this poor girl until the very end, when they decided to be allies. They decided to they decided to wake up and be allies, and they were like, no sir, what you did was wrong. And they took out their book and they were like, actually, we read the black book, we That was a really cringe resolution to a pretty compelling storyline, I must say. But in the end, the biggest loser in that situation was Ginny, because she had to stand up for herself and leave the AP class, and she ended up being in like a regular English class, or like a bottom English class 2 levels below her, and she's, you know, really struggling with that classroom experience because people just do not care. People are on their iPads playing Mario Kart. Like, it's a mess. Okay, and this is someone who is extremely clever, extremely talented, who deserves so much more. But going back to what I said about the evolution of the tragic mulatto stereotype, a lot of the tragedy that surrounds the character of Ginny doesn't have anything to do with her racial identity, but rather her relationship with her mother, which is extremely complicated, okay, and extremely contentious. Because Ginny had Georgia at the age of 15 at such a young age, there were clearly a lot of mistakes that Georgia made along the way as she was raising Ginny. Not to mention the fact that her, you know, financial circumstances were extremely rough, as well as her previous partnerships, which are dangerous. And so, yeah, I completely agree that Ginny is well within her right to be pissed at her mum and to have complicated feelings towards Georgia. But at the end of the day, the show does Ginny no favors because it doesn't fully commit to condemning Georgia when it portrays her as such a likable and kind and loving and charismatic character who has gone through all of these horrific things in her life in the past and has managed to rise out on top each and every time, even if it does take some, you know, horrible criminal activity to do so. When the show is so apologetic for and empathetic towards Georgia and asks us to be the same, it's tough to see where Ginny is coming from, and it's tougher still to relate to her. Okay, so now let's get into the character of Georgia. Now, like I said, Georgia is a very fun, charismatic, lovable character with her sweet as sugar southern accent. Like, she is a joy, but she has definitely done some messed up things in the past and has ruined her children's childhoods as a result. And that's something that can't be overstated. The fact that she has done these things, she made the decisions that she did, has definitely had a detrimental impact on her children, and unfortunately Ginny is paying the price for that now. And who's to say that Austin won't also be paying the price for that in the future when he's fully able to process all of the horrible things that he has seen his mother do or be a part of. But like I said, the problem with the character of Georgia is that the show wants Ginny to condemn her actions, but at the same time wants us as an audience to fall in love with her still. So it doesn't want to be too harsh on her. And that's further emphasized by the fact that the main storyline surrounding the character in season 2 is the fact that she's getting married. Yeah. It's the fact that she's fighting with her daughter, which again, it just comes across as being so annoying and like, oh, Ginny, why don't you just get over it, okay? And the fact that she's getting married to Paul. Like, that's what she's up to in season 2. And this is yet another reason why I think there should have been a nice, you know, time jump between season 1 and season 2, so that Georgia would have been getting up to more, you know, during that time that we could have explored in season 2. But no, not much has really changed since then. It's literally been less than a year since the death of her second husband. So I just don't think it was enough time between seasons to really allow the characters to progress forward and give us an exciting and juicy storyline for the second season. Now, of course, we do have the added storyline of the private investigator who's in town. He was hired by her second husband's ex-wife, who's disputing her second husband's will, because of course she killed because she poisoned him with wolfsbane, that whole thing, okay? So the private investigator wants to find evidence and proof to nail this down, so that she won't get a scent off of her second husband. And in the end, we do see Georgia get arrested by the police. You know, she's in handcuffs in her wedding dress, which, by the way, looked like a bridesmaid's dress. By the way, like, I remember Ginny's father's date had a very similar silky dress, side note, had a very similar silky dress that looked better than Georgia's bridal gown, the second gown that she had at her wedding. Anyways, but she ends up getting arrested, but it's not for the murder that you think. It's not for the murder of her second husband, but rather the murder of Cynthia's dying husband, who she smothered with a pillow. God, because she wanted to put him and his family out of their misery. But I mean, Georgia's rap sheet is long and impressive. So, you know, if the police start digging, if they start doing their job, then they could find other things there as well. And it could put her away for a very long time. I doubt it will, though, because the show, again, likes her so much. You know, she's pretty much the star of the series. So we'll see if anything comes of this arrest in season 3, if they get one. But it's only at the very end of season 2 that we start to see Georgia paying some price for her previous actions. Now, throughout the season, we got some additional flashbacks, as we did in season 1, where we get to see Georgia's life as a teen mom and all of the things that she had to do to protect and provide for her child. And in this season, we see her meeting Austin's father, who at the beginning of season 2 is still in prison, but then he gets released and visits Austin. And it's Iceman, first of all. It's Iceman from the X-Men films, first of all. Second of all, he's violent and a brute and horrible. Like, he's an abusive man. And it's, you know, really sad to see young Georgia, who, by the way, is brilliantly portrayed by Nikki Rummel. I think that's how you pronounce her name. But she's fantastic as well. She's so underrated on this show. But it was so heartbreaking to see, you know, Georgia try to put on a brave face as she was going through all of this horrific abuse behind the scenes, just so she wouldn't traumatize her children. But I would say that whilst that storyline was really gripping and it was, you know, really awful to see her go through such a traumatic, horrible experience, and for that trauma to be, you know, triggered again when he got out of prison, I think it was way too rushed, though, for this season, because so much of the first half of the season dealt with Ginny and being so depressed and just being in such a bad mental state, but kind of in an aimless, purposeless way. And it felt like they wasted a lot of time with that storyline and kind of wrapped it up in a neat bow really quickly by episode 4, so that they could start off the new storylines for this season then. So by that time, it felt a little bit late, and it felt like, you know, to really explore this topic of Austin's father, they had to rush to come to the conclusion that they did by the end. And also, speaking of that conclusion, Paul coming in to save the day at the end there, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about Paul in general. I don't know how I feel. I don't know what the point of Paul is, because he has that whole spiel at the end where he's like, I'm the mayor, I'm a privileged white man, you can't come after me and you can't come after my wife and stepson. First of all, they weren't married at that point. Sorry, semantics. First of all, they weren't married at that point. And secondly, that's a weird brag, but okay. Like, secondly, that's a weird brag for this show to have, considering this show is all about how this young woman, Georgia, you know, single-handedly raised all of her children, fought to the bitter end to make sure that they would have a good life and she could protect them and all of that, only for that whole storyline to end with another man essentially stepping in to save her, to be her knight in shining armor against her abusive ex. Interesting arc. Okay, interesting conclusion is all I'm saying. But overall, when it comes to Georgia's storyline, I think it suffered because the series didn't really know what to do with the character. It wanted the character to go through this like bright, happy time in her life where she's in love with Paul and she's planning a wedding and she's trying to sign up for this, you know, country club or neighborhood watch or whatever it is, to be fully ingratiated into Wilbury, is it? Westbourne? I don't know. Westbourne society. She just wanted to live that wealthy white suburban lifestyle after all of the trials and tribulations that she's had to go through early on in her life. And so you're supposed to root for her there, but how can you when you know that her daughter is literally self-harming and in such a horrible mental state over the things that she has done to get them there? That is the conflict that this series doesn't know how to reconcile with. Now let's get into some of the other characters on the show, because they exist, and this is going to be very, very quick, because I think that a lot of these characters are just shambolic. absolutely shambolic, and they suffer from a very similar illness that the writers have inflicted upon them as Georgia, and that is the writers just not knowing what to do with these characters, not knowing what to do with this show, honestly. The series suffered many of the same issues that Blood and Water season 3 did, in my eyes, where it simply did not know how to reconcile the more serious and dire topics and subject matters at hand with the more preppy, fun, traditional teen drama, teen romance aspects of the show. These are the two sides of Ginny and Georgia that are just constantly in a fight, you know, constantly in conflict, and as a result, neither of them are done justice. The more happy-go-lucky and surface level teen drama side, that's more akin to Never Have I Ever, for instance, isn't done justice because none of the relationships and character arcs are fully explored. Some of them seem to end on a dead end, just abruptly, okay, never to be explored again. And then on the other side, they're trying to tackle these super serious issues like eating disorders, body dysmorphia, self-harm, depression, racism, all of these important topics that they're trying to tackle, and they do a poor job of tackling any of them, okay, because they explore them in a very surface level way, if at all. And like I said, this is an issue that not just Ginny and Georgia need to tackle, but several other Netflix series also need to look into this, because whilst it is important and amazing to have representation of different diverse ethnic groups, representation of different sexualities and sexual experiences, and representation of different, you know, mental health issues, but you're doing each and every one of these topics a disservice if you're just going to throw them on a screen like you throw pasta on a wall and see if it sticks, without actually fully committing to exploring these problems and breaking them down so that you have a comprehensive, you know, view on each topic. If that's not something that you can do, then don't try and tackle it. Don't just try and tick the box so that you have it there represented on screen without actually meaning to follow through. Now, aside from the fact that a lot of the high schoolers this season read more as a cacophony of social justice Reddit threads, I did have a couple of issues that I wanted to pinpoint in particular. First of all, we need to talk about Ginny's black friends. We need to talk about Gracia and co. Listen, I very much took issue with the way that Ginny treated the black population of her school in season 1. In season 1, it was clear that Ginny wanted to ingratiate herself with the white popular kids led by Max, and so she became besties with them and, you know, absolutely ignored the black population of her school, which again could have been some interesting commentary on her biracial experience at that school, but that wasn't really explored further, and it basically came down to the series having a white majority cast with a lot of the darker skinned people of color just being pushed to the wayside. But season 2 tries to rectify tries to fix this by reintroducing us to characters like Gracia and expanding her social circle so she doesn't look like so much of a loner as she did in season 1 when she was offering a hand to Ginny in her lowest time, and that somewhat helped improve the black representation on the show, but not by much. It still felt like Ginny saw the black population of the school as a second option if things didn't work out with her white majority friends, and so that definitely left a bad taste in my mouth, as did the half-hearted, just pointless, useless Gracia storyline of her having a crush on this guy. She had heart eyes for him and was going all gushy inside for him. That whole storyline felt so unnecessary, and again, it was such a tonal shift from some of the more serious aspects of the show that it didn't feel like it belonged in a show like this. It was more fitting for a Never Have I Ever, as opposed to, you know, this series which is trying so hard to be Euphoria. And this falls in line with yet another trend that I've noticed in many a Netflix series, especially the teen dramas, and that is they have way too many storylines for way too many characters, and they don't do the characters any justice as a result. And the second thing I wanted to highlight from this high school group is the character of Marcus. Now, in season 2, we really see Marcus go through it in this depressive episode where he isn't even even able to, you know, get out of bed. He's drinking a lot, especially when he's going to school, and he's really feeling, you know, alone and isolated from his family. Even though they're trying to reach out to him and include him in their family activities, he's just, you know, not able to engage with them and not able to, as he puts it, allow them to love him. The character is clearly going through a really difficult time with his mental health, and I think it's so crucial to have different mental health issues be depicted on screen so that people can see how they manifest and either relate to it, or perhaps they can see that in the people in their lives. You know, they can recognize it and be able to help them with that better level of understanding. So like I said, I do think this representation is great, but the stakes are really high with this kind of thing. And I think it's crucial that the writers and the directors get it right when it comes to the manifestation of these issues. And when it comes to the character of Marcus, I personally I wasn't the biggest fan with the way that they depicted his depression, and my issues largely stemmed from the fact that there were aspects of it that were depicted as, you know, being poetic and almost like romantic. You know, they almost romanticized it, and they didn't really show us enough of the like ugliness. They tried to make it more aesthetically pleasing, like he's this just kind of dark, twisted, handsome, misunderstood guy who, yeah, he's drinking, but we're not seeing him in like a dire state where he's had to face consequences for that. Essentially, they tried to do a Euphoria, but they fell short of really showing us the full consequences of his actions. Again, because they're trying to balance all of these different things and doing none of them justice. However, I will say I appreciated the fact that Marcus called Ginny out for being so self-absorbed. That's definitely something that I noticed as well. I mean, she has main character syndrome because she's the main character. She's the main character, so like it's tough, you know. But I do like the fact that, you know, he pointed that out, and she immediately started to spiral into her own situation again before realizing what she was doing. So yeah, that was a really important development in their relationship, and I do think that they made the right call to kind of take a break from the romantic aspect of their relationship, because I think they had just become way too codependent, and I don't think that being equally broken is a great thing to bond over for a romantic relationship. Like, that's not healthy, you know, bonding over the fact that you both have mental health issues and you both understand each other in that way. I don't think was healthy for Ginny, and I certainly don't think it was healthy for Marcus either. And so overall, guys, I would say that, you know, ultimately I enjoyed season 2 of Ginny and Georgia. I really like these characters, and I think that's what frustrates me the most, is the fact that I see so much potential with these characters, with this cast, and these subject matters that they touch on. I think it could have been a really great second season for the show if they had not made the mistake of starting it back off where season 1 left off, but also if they hadn't made the mistake of trying to tackle way too much with limited skill and capacity. But I still found great enjoyment in the show, and I still, you know, want to root for this family, for Georgia and Ginny and Austin, and now Paul, I guess. Because they deserve the best, guys. They've been through so much and they deserve better. And so I'm hoping in season 3 that we will get to see them, you know, thrive after the little hiccup of Georgia being arrested for murder. And so, guys, with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Ginny and Georgia season 2 a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Ginny and Georgia season 2, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this season down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch your videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next